Hello and welcome back to my world of stuff. It's very difficult this time of year trying to find the right content for this particular YouTube channel with its retro leanings. I'm not one for doing best Christmas movies, favourite Christmas movies. Not a big fan of Christmas movies. I like Christmas TV specials, the old school Christmas specials from the 70s. Some of the ones that we have today are quite agreeable. Trying to find something joyous and life-affirming. It's very difficult. But then I struck upon the perfect series to talk about at Christmas. What could speak more about the Christmas period than a 1983 BBC Scotland 3-part drama about a rabies outbreak? Yeah, welcome to the mad death, you filthy animals. Yes, welcome back to a new video, a retro video, which has come about by a number of happy accidents, really. When I did my Day the Trivage video last month, a couple of people in the comments, and as usual, thank you for all the comments, suggested or mentioned the classic British sort of disaster apocalyptic series, things like Survivors, which I'll be covering in the new year, and a series called The Mad Death, which I'd sort of forgotten about. This was a 3-part series made in 1981 for some reason, not screened until 1983. Probably just a routine scheduling BBC issue. And I remembered The Mad Death, and I suspect that I saw it at the time because this is absolutely the sort of thing I would have gravitated towards. But it's one of those shows that was just 3 episodes. It was screened once, it was repeated. It's been released on physical media in various formats. But it's a show that had sort of slipped into the back of my memory, and I really had pretty much forgotten about it. And I set about trying to get hold of a copy so I could review it for this channel because a couple of people had mentioned it, and I thought, well, yeah, this is a series that people obviously remember. So I set about trying to find a copy of The Mad Death, and of course that's not easy. If you want to pick up a copy on Amazon, for example, it'll cost you a pretty penny. You know, you pay your money, you make your choice. I did manage to track down a copy of the paperback book, released on Granada Paperback Books, written by Nigel Slater. This is the book that the series was based upon. It's not the cookery Nigel Slater, it's a totally different guy. And this book, when I picked it up on eBay, I picked it up for about £10, and it's obviously seen better days, but it's long out of print, and it'll be interesting to read it because it will remind me of that particular genre of horror books which told stories of animals and creatures coming to life and turning against mankind. I'm thinking of Guy and Smith's Crabs books, which were hugely entertaining. Click, click, clickety, click. And we had all sorts of spiders and insects and all sorts of things that turned against mankind. It was a very interesting subgenre in horror. And I think The Mad Death, certainly the book, and probably the TV series, fitted into that particular subset. Then a bell rang in my head that I already had The Mad Death. I picked this up years ago, back in the early days of DVD. A lot of classic TV shows, of course, came to DVD fairly quickly because there was a market for them. Other shows, obviously, the owners and the rights owners didn't think there was much point in licensing them for general release because nobody would be interested. And I remember there used to be a chap online, I think he lived somewhere near me in South Wales, who operated a service where he had copies of old TV series and transferred them to DVD and offered them for sale. And I picked up a couple of these, and I remember I had a copy of The Mad Death, and there it is on this glorious, lavish DVD, which I picked up, God knows, 30 years ago. And I don't think I've ever watched it. Never watched it. This is, in fact, a DVD version of the VHS release of the series. When it came out in VHS, it was unfortunately a 2-hour edited version of the 3-hour original serial. So in preparing this review, this is what I have watched. So I haven't had a chance to see all 3 episodes of the TV series because that's on a DVD which is a little overpriced, should we say, because of its rarity. It's out of print. But I may track it down one day, actually. Anyway, so I've only seen 2/3 of the story, so I haven't seen recently, for the purposes of this video at least, the whole series. However, I think that the edited version is very good and tells the story. There's obviously 55 minutes worth of material missing, and I don't know what that is because having watched the 2-part version, the edited version, it's a nippy story that rattles along, and I suspect that what's been cut out is sort of extraneous stuff that is more sort of character based rather than looking at the drama and the situation itself. It's an interesting series, and as I said, it was made in 1981 and held back for a couple of years. And it's interesting for several reasons. One, it's on film, and a lot of BBC drama series at the time were still being made with that curious mix of videotape or outside broadcast video, or occasionally on film. This appears to be all on film, and it's quite a glossy, expensive looking series. And it takes us right back to a time in the 70s and 80s when rabies was a big deal. The idea of this terrible, incurable disease, although I think there is a rather painful treatment available for it now, but it takes us back to a time when there was a genuine fear that this disease, which we all assumed was prevalent all over Europe, and France was infested with rabies, there was this fear that it would cross the channel. It was a very real fear. You'd see posters at airports warning about the perils of rabies, and it's one of the reasons that we have these strict quarantine rules, even now, I think, about animals being taken abroad, because there is, I don't know what the situation is now with rabies, I don't know what the situation is now in Europe, but certainly back in the 70s and 80s, it was a very real concern, and people were terrified because the effects were so horrific. Rabies, or hydrophobia as it's sometimes known, basically is caught by making contact with the blood or saliva of an infected animal, and it causes terrible hallucinations, it causes terrible fear of water, which is what hydrophobia basically is, which is why that name has been attached to rabies, and eventually convulsions and a very painful death. Not a nice way to go, but rich pickings for a TV drama series based on a book. And this is an interesting show, very well made show. It's not without its flaws, it shows its age, but it's interesting and it's pacey, and certainly the 2-hour version that I watched the other night gripped me from the get-go, and I watched it all the way through and I thought it was really enjoyable. I found it a bit difficult in places as an animal lover, because there are scenes that are disturbing in terms of what has to be done to contain this outbreak of this terrible disease. It all starts off when a wealthy French woman arrives in Scotland for a holiday. She's brought her precious Siamese cat with her, zipped inside the lining of her fur coat. Naughty, not supposed to do that sort of thing. What she doesn't realise is that the cat got into a fight with a rabid fox in the grounds of her home, and it's already succumbing to the rabies virus. The cat goes missing. There's a quite nasty shot of it being feasted on by a local fox. The fox obviously is now infected, and the virus starts to make itself known amongst the human population. The fox is then found on the side of a road by an American businessman, Tom Siegler, played by Ed Bishop. More on him later. The animal seems to be quite docile, and he sort of takes a liking to it. And this is slightly strange credibility, because would anybody actually pick up an injured fox at the side of the road and think it's a beautiful looking thing and will be a fantastic domestic animal? I don't really think so. But for the purposes of the story, he picks up the wild, obviously slightly disturbed creature and takes it home with him. Unfortunately, during the course of taking the creature back to his home, the animal's saliva gets into his system, and he doesn't realise that he's starting to become very unwell. And as it turns out, Tom's not a very nice man, because he also has a mistress. She inevitably also gets infected, and there are some quite tense scenes where Tom has secured the fox in the garage in his home in Scotland. I assume it's Scotland, and the fox starts to get very unwell and very aggressive and very angry, and there's quite a nice tense scene of him in his car trying to set off for work, but the fox attacks him. Unfortunately, the attack scenes are achieved by use of what looks like a rabid Basil Brush puppet being thrown against the side windows of the car with lots of blood spatter and foam and stuff. That's not hugely convincing, but there are quite tense scenes when he's in his car and he's trying to reverse over the fox and kill it because it's turned against him when it appeared to be quite docile. The fox eventually disappears off into the forest, and of course that's where things get really bad. Shortly afterwards, Tom gets involved in a car accident. He starts to hallucinate, loses control of the car, and ends up in hospital. When he's in hospital, staff just think he's suffering from shock or maybe a bad dose of the flu, but then he starts hallucinating, and they're quite disturbing scenes of him hallucinating about water and just his worldview becoming adjusted by this infection that's in his body. Now, I don't know what the genuine hallucinatory effects of rabies are or would be, but that's a pretty good representation of the terror of somebody who's got this thing in their system that they don't understand, that's making them terrified of things and envisioning strange things, water flooding towards them, because that, as I say, is one of the main symptoms of rabies. It's an extremely well done piece, and quite unnerving and quite terrifying to see how Tom disintegrates fairly rapidly. Nobody in the hospital is able to diagnose what's wrong with him. Fortunately, a nurse has seen the effects of the disease in Jamaica, and a diagnosis is quickly made that he is suffering from rabies, and inevitably and sadly he dies. This kicks off an alert. Rabies is in the country, it's out there, something needs to be done to try and contain it. This is where we meet our lead character in the series, Michael Hilliard. He's a vet. He's played by an actor called Richard Heffer. Richard Heffer is quite a well-known British character actor, best known to me, certainly, for playing the character of Jimmy Garland in a couple of episodes of the first series of Terry Nation's Survivors back in 1975. We also meet Dr. Anne Maitland, played by Barbara Kellerman. Hilliard is quite no-nonsense, he's quite ruthless and down-to-earth, and he feels that the only way to contain this situation is quite literally to deal with it swiftly and harshly. Animals must be impounded, stray animals rounded up, pets forcibly vaccinated, and infected animals killed. This all seems very sensible until things start to go horribly wrong. An infected dog forces its way into a shopping centre, and in a very tense and exciting and well done sequence in what I think would have been episode 2. This dog is wandering around this shopping mall in East Kilbride, I think it was filmed in Scotland, has to be hastily evacuated and the dog eventually destroyed. That's quite a tense, quite well done scene, and probably the biggest set piece in the series, and it's quite effective. The situation progresses when we meet Miss Stonecroft, a good performance by Brenda Bruce. She's a lonely sort of spinster woman living in this quite gothic sort of pile out in the countryside, and she's taken upon herself to round up lots of stray animals, cats and dogs and so on. She's got this menagerie at this decaying building. When Hilliard and his people arrive to take them all into captivity, she's not very happy. She lets the animals be taken away, but she does something unfortunate in the what I believe will be the final episode. It's hard to tell because I've seen a 2-hour edit. But she releases all the animals out into the countryside. One of them has been infected. Clearly all the animals are infected. This sets up the final sequence really of the series, where Hilliard is aboard a helicopter and troops are sweeping the countryside and killing all these animals. And that's the bit I actually found quite disturbing, because as I say, as an animal lover, you see all these cats and dogs, particularly dogs, roaming the countryside, and there are some quite graphic scenes of them being shot, and it's difficult to watch in a way even now, because whether the animals are rabid or not is irrelevant in a way. Some of them might not be. There's no signs that they are particularly. Suppose in this situation it's what would have to be done. You'd have to be ruthless. You'd have to destroy these creatures, regardless of whether they had the infection or not, because you can't take the chance. And the whole thing sort of wraps up with it appears that the infection has been contained, or has it? Because there's a scene at the end which suggests that maybe it hasn't. Overall, I enjoyed watching this. It looks quite slick because it's all on film. And again, it's hard to tell because I watched the 2-hour edit, so I don't know what's missing. So there is occasionally a sense of unevenness and jerkiness in the narrative, possibly because the material is not there. If anybody out there has seen the original 3-part version or even has it on DVD, it'd be interesting to hear what was missing, because the narrative does sort of stop-start. Richard Hilliard appears to be the main character, and he doesn't appear to be in much of the first episode. Most of that is spent around Tom Siegler, Ed Bishop's character, with his bizarre affinity for this ailing fox. It's great to see Ed Bishop in this, of course, because he is one of my favourite actors from the 70s due to UFO, the classic Gerry Anderson series, which I'll be covering very soon. Ed Straker was one of my heroes in the 70s when I finally got to see UFO, and I've always thought that Ed Bishop, who passed away in 2005, never became the big star he should have been. He really should have been a major TV star. Never got the breaks, but he turned up in all sorts of projects here and there, including things like The Mad Death. And his performance is terrific, particularly in the sequences where he's in hospital and he's suffering from the disease and he's got this dry mouth, he can't speak. And his mind is going because it's been devastated by the effects of the disease. Really, it's a really good, strong, quite scary performance from him. Where I think the series possibly doesn't quite work is bringing across a sense of real panic or real emergency about the situation. Probably that's a budgetary thing. You get the sense that, rabies is out there, but there's no particular sense of fear in the community. Obviously, people are angry and frustrated that they're losing their animals are taken into care. And in a way, this sort of reflects things that were happening in the pandemic a few years ago, when people were furious that their rights were being compromised by lockdowns and people being told what to do. People don't like being told what to do by authority figures. And you get a little bit of that in this. But you don't really get a sense that there's this massively urgent situation that's going on. You do feel it's been contained by the community, by the scientific community and the government, who are keeping tabs on it. Don't want to make a massive public announcement, maybe. The show aims for a bit of sort of gothic horror in the last episode, where Anne finds herself trapped in Miss Stonecroft's house. She's locked in a cellar with lots of cats who may or may not be rabid, and you do get a sense of Anne's panic and desperation. You don't necessarily get much threat from a few mewling cats, but there is an attempt to build up a sense of menace, that she's trapped in this cellar and she can't get out. No one knows she's there. Similarly, you get scenes where Hilliard is wandering around shooting dogs, and then somebody shoots at him. And this turns out to be the character of Johnny Dolry, played by Richard Morant, who again was a well-known character actor in the 70s. He'd made his name back in 1971 playing the vicious Flashman in a classic BBC adaptation of Tom Brown's School Days. Earlier in the story, for various reasons, Hilliard has ordered Johnny's horse to be shot because of fear it might be rabid. They don't actually carry out any tests to see if it's rabid or not, but there is a fear that it might be, so Hilliard orders it to be shot. There's a little bit of mild relationship stuff going on here, but largely it's about the bigger picture of the rabies situation. But I think the main issue really is that it isn't quite as urgent as it should be. Shopping mall scene is really well done, and there's a nice sense of sort of panic about that. And the scenes at the end where it looks as if all these rabid animals are on the loose. But it's contained quite quickly and it's wrapped up quite quickly. So all in all, I enjoyed The Mad Death. It's not a classic piece of TV, but it's an interesting piece of genre TV or genre-adjacent TV, made in a time when BBC wasn't necessarily making a lot of stuff like this. And it's worth a look if you can find it, as I had a bit of luck finding it, that I already had a copy of it. It's interesting because it reflects that period when rabies was something that people were honestly worried about. The thought of, as I said, that Europe was full of rabid animals that were just waiting to rush across the channel. And it brings that across quite well. And being on film, it has a sort of documentary feel to it in some ways, particularly in those scenes where you see the soldiers combing the countryside, trying to find the dogs, helicopters and things. It has a nice scale to it. And I don't think it completely works in being a horror series, because it is more of a cautionary tale and a warning about what might happen if rabies got a grip on the country, which fortunately it never did. An interesting series, one I'm glad I've seen. I am frustrated I haven't seen the whole 3 episodes, but I will at some point track down a copy of it and shoot it dead. But an interesting piece of British genre television, and I'm much obliged to those of you in my Day of the Triffids review who commented on it and mentioned it and reminded me of it, and I was able to track it down. As I said, I've now got the book, which I'll be adding to my huge reading pile. So that's The Mad Death. If you have seen The Mad Death, or if you've seen it years ago, if you've got it on DVD and seen it recently, why not let me know what you thought of it? Leave a comment down below. It'd be nice to hear what your thoughts of it were. I would give it, incidentally, as a rating, I think I'd give it an 8 out of 10, because it was very entertaining. Didn't bore me, kept me entertained. Obviously, the picture quality wasn't fantastic on this VHS burn DVD, but it was entirely watchable, and it flew by. The 2 hours flew by, which makes me believe that the 3 hours probably would as well. Right, thank you very much for watching. Those of you who are new here, and I know lots of you are new here, why not like and subscribe to the channel? Loads of retro TV stuff here, loads of retro film reviews, modern film reviews, lots of Doctor Who if you're into that sort of thing. Plenty of stuff, so all you have to do is press the subscribe button. It's free, it doesn't cost you a penny, it's not a TV streaming subscription. And leave a comment. And as a final piece of housekeeping, if anybody's been looking back at some recent videos, you might have noticed a few odd edits where music suddenly disappears or clips disappear. I'm suddenly getting a lot more copyright claims than I did previously, possibly because the channel's becoming more popular with 1,500 subscribers. And it's slightly annoying that music tracks which I downloaded to use over my title sequences, which were clearly marked as copyright free, are now getting copyright claims. It's annoying. You can argue them, you can dispute them, but that takes them a month to sort out, and in the end it's easier just to trim the clips up and find something else. And I am quite keen to have title sequences and title music, because it makes it feel more of a product rather than just me yapping at you for 20 minutes. It gives it a beginning and an end, and I quite like that sort of thing. So bear with me as previous videos get mutilated for reasons beyond my control. Right, again, thank you for watching. Be lovely to hear from you, so leave a comment down below. I will see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.